Okay, I'm gonna close the waiting room, so everyone should just come on in.
There's 12 people.
All right, Greg, I think everyone's here.
Okay. Stephanie?
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our first virtual public meeting about our solid waste master plan. This is a new, the virtual world is new for all of us, or we're all using it in new and different ways. So we're excited to be doing this with you tonight. And my name is Stephanie Cooper, and I'm the Deputy Commissioner for Policy and Planning at MassDEP. And I want to welcome you into this first of a series of virtual outreach meetings that we are holding this summer and in the beginning of the fall to seek input on our solid waste master plan for 2020 to 2030. So I want to thank you for joining us. And I do want to start by noting and letting you know that we are recording this meeting, and we're doing that so it can really help us to make sure that we've captured all of your contributions, that we'll be able to go back afterwards and go through your comments and thoughts and make sure that we've heard it all right, and can capture it for ourselves to give us to further shape our review of the plan and thinking about where we go from here. So before we go further, I want to introduce our team. And Greg Cooper and John Fisher are here from our Bureau of Air and Waste. And many of you know them as the architects of solid waste and recycling policy in the Commonwealth. Both have many years of experience doing this work. And because I can't immediately see all of the Zoom boxes, I cannot see if a couple of other staff members have joined, but we're expecting a couple of our attorneys, Laura Swain and Shane Settlesing, who work on solid waste issues. So you may see them around the Zoom screen. And we may also be joined by Deneen Simpson, our environmental justice director. She has helped us plan these sessions. So with that, tonight I want to say is about hearing from you. It's really all about you and your thoughts. So we're eager to hear your perspectives and your ideas about managing solid waste and recycling in Massachusetts, and whether they're big picture policy, statewide, national, international ideas, or whether they're based on your own personal experience in your community. They're equally important to us, and we really want to hear from you. My role is we're getting things going. Obviously, I'm going to walk you through the agenda and give a brief introduction and set a little context for the discussion we're going to have tonight. But before I do that, I would like to ask Kirk Cabral, who's helping to support our meeting tonight and facilitate the Zoom platform, to give us a little bit of an overview of how we'll walk through this virtual participation, and particularly how you can participate and communicate with us tonight. So I'd like to turn the floor over to Kurt.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. So as Stephanie said, we're going to be recording this session so we can capture public comments. You'll probably have noticed, in order to minimize background noise, all attendees in this meeting are on mute. However, there will be opportunities to provide feedback throughout the meeting. Participants will stay on mute unless otherwise called upon. In order to provide feedback, when we ask for your input, we ask you to do the following, and it looks like everyone for the most part has done this. To enter your full name if it's not currently showing. And if you click on the participant panel, button at the bottom, for many people on their desktop, it's gonna be docked at the bottom. You can see everybody who's in the room. And if you hover over your name, you should be able to right click on more and rename yourself. So if you don't have your full name showing, we just ask you to do that. Thank you. I'm joined today by 3 team members. You'll see, for example, under my name, it says Zoom support. Meredith and Maya are also assisting me. And we can help you out at any point if you're having some Zoom difficulty. So feel free in the chat box to reach out to us directly if you have any difficulty with any of these features tonight. When we do open the virtual floor for feedback to help keep us organized, you'll first need to raise your virtual hand. You do this by selecting your name in the participant panel and choosing raise hand. For many on desktops, will be docked at the bottom of the participant panel. And for those joining us on iPhones, Android, you probably will find this under the More option. If there are multiple hands raised simultaneously, our team will do its best to get to you in the order you raised your hand. If everyone could take a moment and find the raised hand option, and again, it might be different based on your device or browser. So go ahead, and this is a good practice right now to raise your virtual hand. I'm going to give everyone a chance to do that. Looks like some folks are still looking for it. I'm still waiting for a couple more hands there. You might have lowered your hand, which is also an option. So if you just keep your hand up for a moment and maybe raise it again, that'd be great. Okay. I think we have a good amount of folks who are able to raise their hands. And for any who don't, Meredith, could you take just note some of the names? We might need to help some people out. Okay, great. So this is how this is going to work tonight. So first you're going to raise your virtual hand. We're going to take note of who raised their hand and kind of in what order. And when we open the virtual floor for feedback, Meredith will chat with you in the chat box to let you know we're going to take you off mute. We will lower your hand, and then we'll turn on your mic, so give you an opportunity to speak. If anybody has any questions, again, throughout this entire time, you can reach me, Meredith, or okay. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it back over to Stephanie, John, and Greg.
Thank you very much, Kurt. That's really helpful. And while Kurt was giving you instructions, explaining how this whole thing works, I had a chance to look around the virtual room, and I did want to recognize Senator Bruce Tarr, who I spotted, who is our senator from the North Shore, and also our Senate Minority Leader, and a great leader in all things environmental, including solid waste. So I want to thank him for taking the time to tune in with us tonight. So now you can see we've turned the slide deck to tonight's meeting agenda, and we've already discussed the first two items. So we're definitely moving on time. So I'm going to talk about a little bit more about why we're having these meetings, and why we're prioritizing having more engagement on our solid waste master plan and the particular areas that we'd like to focus on in our discussion with you tonight. And then John Fisher is going to give you an overview of the solid waste master plan, and just so you have that context. Some of you I recognize have been very involved in advising us on the solid waste master plan and on solid waste and recycling issues, but this also might be your first time tuning in. So I want to say, there's plenty of material on our website, the draft plan. There's also a webinar, kind of a solid waste master plan 101 that you can listen to. But if you're coming to this conversation fresh and haven't done any of that, don't worry about it. Not a problem. We still want to hear what your takes and perspectives are, and those materials will be available to you after the meeting. And as we'll talk about, you have the opportunity to choose to provide us public comments for a couple of months. So you have plenty of time to absorb and think through what you want to tell us about solid waste and recycling. So then after that, we're going to go through each of the three areas of focus for discussion and give you an opportunity to share your views, your ideas, concerns, anything you want to tell us. So we're going to summarize each issue as we get into them. We have some questions for discussion, and then we'll open the floor for comments in the way that Kurt just described, and then we'll move on to the next issue and follow that same pattern. So we'll go by sort of issue by issue, ask the questions, and then give people an opportunity to speak on that particular issue. And so that'll break things up a little bit too. I think it should go well. And so with that, Greg, could you go, I'm sorry, so then, and that's the discussion, and then we just do sort of the wrap up, our next steps, and adjourn. And then I was going to say, Greg, if you could go to the next slide, which you did, that's great. I want to give a little bit of context before we get into this. So last fall, we released a draft solid waste master plan. We sought public comment, and we held 4 public hearings. We got a lot of interesting input through many different, points of view, different corners of the Commonwealth, and all of the comments that we received are posted on our website if you want to take a look and get a sense of the types of things that we heard. At the same time, we were asked to engage with more communities, and sort of pointed out to us that we needed to be sure we were connecting with people in different communities, and in particular with environmental justice communities. And we wanted to make sure that we were reflecting the concerns of those frontline communities, those who carry the heaviest environmental burdens. Now, clearly, recent events in the world, in our country, have boldly highlighted the need for discussions about environmental justice, but also about racial equity. And at this time, we know, as a public agency and as public servants, we owe special attention to communities that have borne those disproportionate burdens and have not received equal benefits. And we need to make sure that we're considering these issues and their perspectives and the impacts in the update of this plan. So we want to make sure that we're developing, as part of this plan, a way of having continued engagement and really making effective and real connections with these communities. And we're committed to do that as an important element of this plan and of this process. Secondly, given the ever-expanding impacts of climate change, we also wanted to highlight climate change issues and how they will play out, how they've already played out and how they'll continue to play out in managing solid waste and other materials. And obviously, since last fall, when we released the solid waste master plan, our whole world has changed due to COVID-19. That has included changes to the way solid waste is generated and how it's managed. So we're all, as we know, still living through the COVID-19 emergency, and it's important to consider what issues have emerged during this time and what more may emerge as we make our way through this pandemic. And so for all these reasons, we decided that we wanted to seek more input through public comment and through these meetings, and to focus on the importance of the 3 areas that I've just described as they relate to solid waste: environmental justice, climate change, and the COVID-19 pandemic. Before we go further, I would like to thank the following organizations, and I can see that most of them are represented here tonight, for helping us to organize and promote these meetings and really urging us to convene this process. And they are Clean Water Action, Community Action Works, Conservation Law Foundation, and MassDEP. So really want to give a shout out and appreciation to them for their guidance and support. And so the second process was really formally launched on June 25th, and we opened the second public comment period. It will remain open through September 15th. We will be holding, as we noted, 3 other sessions. We'll be recording the sessions, taking notes, and then being able to reflect back on them and collect that input to guide us as we finalize the plan. As I already mentioned, you can submit written comments. You're going to hear more about how to do this tonight, and you can do that through September 15th, so you have plenty of time to do that. So with that, I would like to introduce John Fisher, who's going to give you an overview of the draft solid waste master plan.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. So I appreciate everyone taking the time out of your evening to join us here tonight and to talk about the solid waste master plan. We really appreciate your time and thoughts, so we're glad you joined us tonight. So I'll talk a little bit just about a very big picture overview of the master plan. I'll also just remind people of some resources we have available to provide more information if you want to dig into it further. MassDEP, we are required by statute to maintain a solid waste master plan for Massachusetts. And typically we update that plan on a 10-year cycle. We're currently operating under a plan that runs through 2020, and this draft plan would carry us through 2030 and beyond. So this is intended to provide an overall framework for our solid waste, recycling, waste reduction policies and programs that we can operate within during a 10-year period. So this is our opportunity when we work on the solid waste master plan to take a step back, to think a little bit bigger picture about where we are and where we're heading, and to chart our course for the next decade. And again, laying the groundwork for going well beyond the next decade and how we manage our waste materials in Massachusetts. So right now, as Stephanie mentioned, we wanted to take a little more time, given everything that's going on in the world around us and the concerns that have been raised to us, to take a further step back before we finalize this plan and this 10-year vision, to get more input in this plan, to hear more voices, and to take that into account before we take the next step to move ahead. I'll also say that this plan is a document that we expect to continue to revisit over the course of this 10-year period, and we expect to, make adjustments as we need to. A lot changes over 10 years, and we want to make sure that this plan provides us enough direction to give us a clear approach and clear pathway, but that we have some ability to shift course and make corrections as we go. So I do want to take just a moment. We do want to keep the bulk of the time tonight to hear from all of you and to get your input and your comments, but I just want to take a moment just to see if anyone has any quick questions of sort of clarification about the solid waste master plan and what it is from a big picture perspective. And if so, we'd like to just address those for a couple minutes now. If not, we'll dive right into our next thoughts. So let me pause for a moment and just see if there are any questions along these lines.
And just a reminder to raise your virtual hand if you do want to take yourself off mute. Okay, we have a couple folks. Jillian Howell, I saw was first.
I can't unmute myself.
Yeah, there you go.
Thanks. It makes sense that you're planning to revisit or have this as an outline and a strategy for the next 10 years, but planning to revisit it. I was wondering, is there a formal process of how you go about revisiting potential new strategies or new things over the course of the 10 years? Is it outlined every year, or is it just kind of you'll see what happens?
Sure, thank you. So that's a good question. So we'll do this in a couple different ways. So one is that we continue to have various advisory committees that we maintain related to solid waste issues. We have an overall solid waste advisory committee, and then we have more focused committees that provide us input on more specific issues. We periodically check in with those committees about how we're doing over the course of the planning period. And another thing that we propose to do is develop action plans along the way. We talk in the master plan about specific action plans on specific sets of issues that we're facing. A good example of where we've done that is on reducing food waste. And so we take some time to develop a more in-depth and more specific plan that we can modify as we go to address specific aspects of the plan. And then we are thinking about the idea of having a mid-course assessment with the plan. So 5 years in, check in, see how we're doing relative to our goals and our programs and policies, and think about whether we want to make any adjustments to the plan. So those are some of the ways we will look to address that. Anything else, Kurt? Or
Yeah, we have Bruce Tarr. I'm going to take you off mute here. Okay, Bruce, you're all set.
All right, good evening, and I'll be very brief. I just wanted to thank you all for hosting this event tonight, for us all to get a closer look at the Solid Waste Master Plan. I think it is one of the most important documents that doesn't get enough attention in state government, and so I appreciate the fact that everyone is working hard on this, making this presentation available to us tonight, and importantly, giving everyone an opportunity to comment as the plan moves forward. And I think it's very significant to think about the embrace of the plan being the next decade, essentially. And that makes it particularly important for us to focus on it and do whatever we can to make it as strong as possible. So thank you all very much. And I look forward tonight to listening more than speaking, but I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you taking the time to join us and participate and listen. And we look forward to hearing from everyone tonight. So if there are no other immediate questions right now, I'm going to shift gears and talk a little bit about the issues that we're particularly interested in hearing from people about tonight. So if I can have the next slide, Greg. So we have a set of questions that we're going to use to guide our discussion tonight. I'm going to run through all of these to begin with, and then we'll take these in turn into three categories. So I want to run through these first just to get you started thinking about them, and to get these in your heads as we go. And you can start thinking about these questions and thoughts about these. So our first set of questions are relative specifically to concerns from environmental justice communities or other communities that are disproportionately impacted by solid waste management activities. So we want to hear about what specific challenges are faced by populations in these communities that are disproportionately impacted, and then how could our solid waste master plan better address these challenges. We've also framed a question in terms of how can environmental justice communities be better reflected and considered in how waste is managed in Massachusetts. Again, thinking in particular over this 10-year planning period. And then, are there specific policies or programs that you would recommend to us that would better address the solid waste management concerns of environmental justice communities? So that's going to be the first set of questions that we'll talk about. And then let me turn to the next one here. So the next set of topics that we'll talk about is what actions can we pursue to reduce carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions from the management of solid waste to help meet the Commonwealth's Global Warming Solution Act goals. So we want to take some time specifically to talk about how our management of waste can better address the climate challenges that we're facing as a Commonwealth. So we'll take some time to talk about those climate change issues relative to waste management next. And then, yep, next one. And then our third set of issues is we want to talk about what impacts COVID-19 has had and will continue to have on waste management. And then are there specific waste management initiatives that may be either problematic or beneficial to implement as we work to adjust to the impacts of COVID-19? So that will be our third set of questions that we'll address together. And then we will have some time at the end. We'll make sure we set aside some time at the end for any other comments that maybe don't readily fall into one of these three categories. So we'll make sure I'll be keeping an eye on my time as we go. We'll make sure we save a few minutes at the end for any other issues. We will circle back. I'll put up a link in the presentation at the end, but I do also want to remind people that we do have the draft solid waste master plan is up on our website. We also have our hearing notice that includes these questions that I just went through. And then we recently developed about a 30-minute overview presentation that will guide you through the basics of the solid waste master plan. So if you want to hear a little bit more about it and hear more than we have time to cover tonight, I encourage you to take a look at that presentation. It's a good overview to kind of go through all of the sections of the plan and understand our overall objectives and strategies. So if you're interested in learning more, I encourage you to check out those resources following tonight's meeting, and we will provide a link to those at the end and talk a little bit more about next steps at the end. So let me dive right in here and move on to our first set of issues and questions that we want to talk about. So again, I went through these briefly. These are the same questions we just put up. So we're going to leave these questions up here now. for people to look at and to think about. And I want to, at this point, open it up for people's comments, specifically relative to these questions and these issues that we've articulated, and we'd like to hear your thoughts relative to these. So with that, I will pause and let's open it up for people to comment, please.
Not seeing any raised hands at the moment, John.
Okay. So let me just take a moment while we're here, both to give folks a chance to think about this and just talk a little bit more to frame these issues and what we're thinking about here. So, you know, when we talk about environmental justice communities in Massachusetts, the way we define that, we talk about 3 criteria. So one is related to annual median household income relative to the statewide median, and communities that are significantly below the state median in terms of household income. That's one factor that can define an environmental justice community. Another factor is that if a significant portion of the residents identify as a race other than white, that is a factor that's considered in defining an environmental justice community. And then a third is if those households have either limited English-speaking ability or do not speak English and speak other languages as their primary language. So those 3 criteria are criteria that we look at when we define what we mean by an environmental justice community. And we're particularly interested in concerns and impacts from those communities in particular, as well as any community that's really disproportionately impacted by solid waste activities. We're going to have a real short meeting if you guys don't have anything to share with us. So I'd really welcome your thoughts and comments at this point. Don't be shy. We would like to hear all that you have to say.
Okay, it looks like we have one person with their hand raised, Ann Devlin. So Ann, we'll go ahead and unmute you now for you to provide your comment.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity tonight to comment on the solid waste master plan, which I agree is crucial to get it right. And I am president of Saugus Action Volunteers for the Environment. I've been a resident of Saugus for over 40 years. And of course, I have lived with the Wheelabrator in my backyard for that length of time. And also, I think it's important to note that there are 2 other incinerators also in my county, which is Essex County. And in terms of environmental justice, you know, the area of Saugus that is most impacted is basically blue collar, lower income. We're all particularly concerned about the impact that the air pollution has made concerning COVID, because we know that the air pollution just adds to the problem. I think that in terms of the solid waste master plan, we need to make sure that we are focusing on zero waste so that we can phase out incineration going forward. I think that incinerators have been found to be not the way to get rid of trash. And so the only way that we can do that is to cut back on the trash going there. So we really need to make the plan the focus of the plan to be on zero waste. And we most importantly need to focus on enforcing the bans that are already in place. And that just isn't happening. And speaking of COVID again, because of that, with the cities and towns that were able to enforce plastic bag bans, you know that was lifted until last week. And I think the majority of those plastic bags, because no one had anywhere to bring them, I think they went up in smoke. And so it compounded the problem of what was coming out of the incinerator at a time when it was the most dangerous to have to deal with that. I think that when you mentioned before about food waste, that also is so important, because that is something that never belonged in the trash. And I think that statewide composting has to be focused on. Townwide composting, textile, all the ways that we can get to zero waste by removing the food products, by removing the textiles, maybe enforcing the curbside pickup of the textiles, because as we all know, it has to be easy. And during this COVID lifting, I noticed that in Saugus, where we fought so hard to also impose a styrofoam ban, that seemed to be lifted as well. Even though it never happened, it seemed as though everybody thought it was okay to lift the styrofoam ban. And so those products were also continuing to be added to that waste stream, which was ending up going up the chimney at Wheelabrator at the worst time possible. And then, if I could just add now, focusing on maybe a pay-as-you-throw program for some point down the road, because I know that in Saugus, again, we tried to initiate a pay-as-you-throw maybe 10 or 15 years ago, and it was shot down as a tax. And of course, if it's done right, it's not an added fee to anyone, because you end up with 1 or 2 free barrels, as you know. I just think that any measure in place that could be part of the program to get to zero waste, because there's no other way that we're going to phase out incineration if we don't go in that direction. And like I said, in terms of the virus, now more than ever, it's so important. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Ann. And we will hopefully, or we will have some time also to circle back on some of the COVID impacts that you mentioned as well. So welcome other thoughts about that a little bit later also.
John, we have another person who'd like to speak. We have, I apologize if I mispronounce this, Joe Gravelese. I'm unmuting you, Joe.
You were close, Joe Gravelisi. So thank you for taking the time. My name is Joe Gravelisi, and I'm a resident of Revere. I appreciate you taking the time to open up for more community input on this, because as the previous speaker mentioned, this is an especially important year to be talking about why we need to move from a solid waste plan to a zero waste plan. I'll keep my comments brief because I can't really add too much more to what the previous speaker already said. She kind of made my points, so I appreciate that. But I'm a Revere resident, like I said. Solid waste policies have a direct impact on my quality of life here and in our neighboring communities because of the presence of the trash burning incinerator. So there are direct quality of life reasons why we want to see us move towards a zero waste policy. Noise pollution, plain old pollution. But beyond that, beyond the sort of everyday quality of life issue, as a matter of environmental policy and of environmental justice, we do need to move towards zero waste policies as our sort of guiding light for how we're looking at our waste policies. The fact of the matter is that right now, before any big new technological advances or big policy changes, a significant proportion of our waste that we currently burn or put into landfills, we already know how to reuse or recycle it. So there are short-term steps that we can take to at least move us towards zero waste that don't require anything beyond what we already know how to do. Ann mentioned composting, perfect example of this. But zero waste needs to be that guiding principle. Everything needs to be aligned around that. We're going through an important conversation right now in all areas of the state about how to lift up marginalized communities. And environmental justice is a huge component of lifting up marginalized communities. The higher rates of pollution in Chelsea, for instance, are not only correlated with the higher rates of COVID-19 infection, but also every year with rates of things like cancer, asthma, and other respiratory problems. So communities like ours disproportionately host these environmentally hazardous facilities, like the trash burning incinerator, but across the board. So moving towards zero waste is a key step in bringing about environmental justice and in making Massachusetts more equitable. Thank you, and have a great rest of your night.
Great, thank you, Joe.
John, there's nobody else. And for those who arrived, maybe not at the top of the hour, just as a reminder, if you'd like to share and say something, please raise your virtual hand and we will take you off mute. Thank you. John, nobody else at this time.
Okay.
John, this is Greg. I just wanted to say we had somebody come through the chat and just made a statement, which I would just like to read. Plastic production is ramping up with no end in sight. Many of these plants are based in environmental justice communities. I'd like to see Massachusetts be proactive in reducing the production of plastic packaging rather than always playing catch up.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to move on to our next questions, but we can certainly revisit these questions here. So we'll move on to talk about some climate change issues that we want to discuss, but I'd also kind of these environmental justice concerns are also fair game, so feel free to continue to address or add comments on those issues as well. But the next set of issues that we wanted to talk about relate to the climate change impacts of how we manage waste. And the question that we defined here is what actions can be pursued to reduce carbon emissions from the management of solid waste to help meet the Commonwealth Global Warming Solutions Act goals. And so, we want to think about what can we do with the way we manage our waste materials, whether it's waste reduction, recycling, composting, or the way solid waste management functions to help contribute to our Global Warming Solutions Act goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Massachusetts. So that's our discussion question relative to climate change and greenhouse gas impacts. So we want to think about the intersection between climate change and global warming and our waste and materials management.
John, while we're waiting to see if folks might have comments, I would just add a little bit of background about the Global Warming Solutions Act. It was a statute that the legislature enacted, I believe, in 2007. Senator Carr can correct me if I've got the year wrong. And it established, binding statutory goals for emissions reductions, for reduction of carbon pollution. And the first milestone is this year, 2020, when we have to reduce our emissions by 25% as compared to a baseline of 1990 levels. And then by 2050, the statute calls for the Commonwealth to reduce by 80%. Recently, there's been a whole policy discussion about getting to net zero by 2050, and what does net zero mean? And the Commonwealth has, the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs has proposed a goal of 85% as net zero. So that's just a little bit of background, and I can see someone's got their hand raised, so I'll go ahead and mute myself.
Yeah, the first hand that I saw was Kirsty. Again, I'm going to apologize for butchering names tonight. Pishi. And I'm going to take you off mute.
There we go. I think I'm unmuted now. Hear me?
Okay. Yes, we can.
It's patchy, Kurt. It's impossible. It's not your fault. The one point I would like to make about the Global Warming Solutions Act is that, especially the folks at DEP, but many people know, waste and production of goods are a tremendous part of our climate problem. And I think that there's no question that in order to make the Global Warming Solution Act goals, we're going to need to not only change how we do things upstream so that we have a circular economy and aren't creating as much, not using as much energy and creating as many pollution impacts as we are, but also we're going to have to phase out the incinerators in the state. And I would also argue that decreasing the waste would not only help with that aspect of it, the incinerators, but then also the tremendous impact that methane has coming from landfills. The methane cannot be captured adequately on those acres large landfill cells that are open. Waste Management themselves said at a recent hearing that they think they capture 90% of it, but they don't know how much they produce every year. So they have no idea how much they're actually capturing because they don't know how much they're producing. And what that means, and there's been a recent report that said that methane from landfills has increased and that methane has increased precipitously over the last 10 years. So one of the best things we can do, in my opinion, to achieve all three of these goals, phasing out landfills, phasing out incinerators, and also changing things upstream, is to put pay-as-you-throw in place across the state, as was already mentioned by Ann Devlin from SAVE. And I would argue that under the Global Warming Solutions Act, DEP does have the power to put pay-as-you-throw in place, or guidelines for pay-as-you-throw, requiring municipalities to perhaps reach certain per capita waste limits. In other words, if you're producing more than a certain amount of waste per person in your town, then you have to put some kind of a pay-as-you-throw program in place. As Ann also said, pay-as-you-throw is a local political bugaboo many times, and I think that this would solve that problem if it was done at the agency level across the state. So I know that DEP has come out and said in the past that they don't believe that they have the power to put pay-as-you-throw in place. I would argue that especially under the Global Warming Solutions Act, but there are other ways as well, that DEP does have the power to do that. And I think you could literally reduce residential waste and perhaps business waste. If you put a system of sensors on dumpsters in place, you could reduce the waste by about 40, 50% within a couple of years. So I think that's really worth considering. Thank you for having these meetings and for hearing me today.
Thank you, Kirsty.
The next person, John, we have up is Deborah Darby. I'm going to take you off mute.
I guess, there we go. I'm unmuted now. Thank you so much for having tonight's meeting. I also want to thank Bruce Tarr for joining us tonight. I'm a Gloucester resident, so it's really nice to have Bruce on the call this evening. I just want to just share a couple of simple thoughts. I work with a lot of county, municipal, and state clients as a professional environmental consulting firm. And I really see a trend where solid waste plans are moving over to sustainable material plans. And I think, we've talked about this in the past, and it might be some sort of a branding exercise, but I really think it could help focus our thinking around more sustainable materials management if we have our master plan putting us in that direction. Just the other quick point I'd love to deliver, being that I am an organics recycling expert, have been involved with organics since 2006. It would be a great thing for our state to recognize the importance for a universal organics recycling, that all food scraps and compostable papers should be banned and managed to higher value use through either composting and anaerobic digestion. And those are really the two major points I wanted to share this evening. And thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Deb.
Okay, the next person we have, John, is Steve Changris, and you're unmuted, Steve.
Thank you, Kurt, and good evening, everybody. And thanks to the department for hosting this hearing. We thought we had tidied this up and closed the process back in December, but reopening it to discuss these issues of vital concern is a good thing, and we support that. And let's have the discussion and try to move the needle here. I did want to, I sort of wanted to just jump in on one or two things with the environmental justice discussion before you close, John. And, you know, part of it has to do with the process. One of the things that, you know, we like to try to remind people about is, you know, we have some statistics and facts about the size of the industry and the kinds of things that we do. And it's important for people to remember that, you know, we run state-of-the-art environmental infrastructure permitted by the state. This is a result of a sophisticated local planning law that includes site assignment, along with DEP site assignment, and then all the permitting conditions and oversight and continued regulation of the facilities. We have disposal facilities, whether they be a landfill or a waste energy plant. We have medical waste combustors that take care of the medical waste. We have landfills that manage the disposal of waste. And then we have a whole fleet of recycling centers, everything from simple fiber or bottles and cans, balers and processing sites, or, you know, a full-blown single-stream MRF with all the bells and whistles to manage the material, like the picture behind me. And we also have all the collection vehicles. And, you know, I think we're responsible for upwards of the statistics we use in Massachusetts is we're responsible for 26,000 jobs, a state payroll in excess of 1.3 billion and 5 billion in state annual revenues, with an annual compensation for employees of about $58,000. And that's all very important, particularly when you talk about local issues, you talk about environmental justice issues, you talk about COVID, you talk about climate changing. We are one part of a big cog, and our job is to take these materials and manage them according to the direction that the state and the authorities approve. And that's the system that we've built over the years. And, you know, one of the things, particularly on the environmental justice part, that is really important to remember, particularly because of the site assignment law in Massachusetts, the way a facility is developed is with municipal input. So what's happened over time with the emergence and the development of environmental justice issues to become a part of a policy consideration, it's a new area. The department has an environmental justice officer. Well, we encourage all people to be involved in the process of siting and operating our facilities. We are good corporate citizens. We run permitted facilities. We want to have good neighborhood relations where we have our facilities operate, and we want to be viewed in that context more than any other. And so that's really important to remember, that there's a very involved process. And I think that's one of the biggest things that the department can think about is, even in the plan, just point out about this extensive process where there's a lot of room for involvement for people. And we want all groups and people to be involved in the process. Couple of the issues on the climate change, as I've just tried to talk, and I'll get off quick after this issue of we have a system that's built with the state-of-the-art waste management and recycling facilities. And when you look at what we do with the material, the after useful life discards of the citizens, the communities and businesses of the state, what we do with it is just one very small part of it. If you look at the full life cycle lens, from raw material extraction to production, to the use of and to the after useful life and management materials, we're just a small part of the climate changing impacts. So one of the things that we applaud the department for doing, and I think it's in the plan already, and that the department's already actively engaged in a lot of these activities, and we encourage that because the major impacts are mostly upstream, that, you know, we really have to do more work to applaud the work in the area of focusing on and getting rid of those upstream impacts. Excuse me, I got a little bit balled up in my comments there. But with the upstream climate changing impacts, focus on manufacturing, focus on consumer behavior, try to get people aware of their carbon footprint, and for them to take the actions necessary to help lower it. If it's the idea of buying something in a less wasteful packaging, if it's something about turning a light off when you leave the room, or turning the thermostat down, those are the things that can really help, you know, move the needle as we drive towards the goals of the Global Warming Solution Act. And just to be mindful of what we do, our level of activity is directly related to what the citizens and communities and businesses of the state do. If they kept doing what they did every day and we weren't there managing the material, we'd have a whole different kind of set of problems. One that we were fortunate to sidestep during COVID, and we're very grateful for that. So we'll talk more about that at another time. But that was just some of the thoughts the membership wanted to share tonight so far.
Okay, thank you, Steve.
John, the next person up is Janet, and we'll take you off mute, Janet.
Thanks. You didn't even try for the last name there, huh?
I didn't, Jen. I'm sorry. You were the only.
Wow. Okay, so I'm Janet Dominitz, and I am with MassPERG, and I'm also with the groups that Stephanie mentioned earlier, MassPERG, Clean Water Action, Conservation Law Foundation, and Community Action Works have been together as a coalition for a long time now. And since we're being recorded, I literally want it for the record to say that, because I know the term has come up a few times already, we are for a set of policies that achieve zero waste by 2030. And I just wanted to make clear that that's not like an ideal, that is actual internationally recognized public policy. And as Joe said earlier, it's, you know, you can find, you don't have to do much Googling to find the backup to what Joe said, which is the vast majority of what we dispose of can be reduced and shouldn't be there to begin with. So I just wanted to make clear, number one, that zero waste is actual public policy that we want enacted in this master plan. And we really want it renamed the Zero Waste Master Plan so that we're working to achieve that by 2030. That's number one. Number two, a piece of that, as you know, people promote different kinds of policies. I think a major piece of that is going back to the mantra that we all learn, you know, some people starting in first grade, that reduce comes first. And I don't even want to talk about recycling until we're done reducing. And to reinforce the previous point, so much of our waste could simply be reduced. I think Anne mentioned food waste. That's something like, you know, 28 or 30% of what's being disposed of now, none of which should be disposed of. I mean, we can go through the pie chart, but the point is recycling, that's like, you know, that's from the 80s. We're all about reduce now, and we want that to be the first imperative to every single policy that we discuss. And then third, I just want to say I totally, and I should have thanked the DEP to begin with for holding these meetings. And I really appreciate the, you know, the way it's organized, these presentations, climate change, EJ communities, and COVID. But, you know, and it's easier to talk about it that way, but of course they're all connected. Like, I think living through this emergency for the past 4 months has only served to remind us, as previous speakers said, the harm to EJ communities that comes from the way that we live in such an unsustainable fashion. Climate change, the numbers are only getting worse every single day as we see the statistics. And certainly COVID has made pretty much everybody on the planet aware of how tenuous everything is and how hard we have to work to sustain our environment, our public health, our community. So I just wanted to make those 3 points, which really just sew together what other people said. But most importantly, I just wanted it for the record that all these pieces that we will be discussing, you know, our groups, our coalition, officially asked the DEP to set a goal of zero waste, work backwards from that, and that all these policies should meet that imperative. So thank you again to all the DEP staff that are obviously have put a lot of effort into these hearings.
Great, thank you, Janet.
Next up, John, is Claire Miller, and we'll take you off mute, Claire.
Great, thanks.
Girl.
Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Great. So I'm Claire Miller. I'm with Community Action Works, formerly known as Toxic Action Center up until a couple weeks ago, and part of Zero Waste Massachusetts with MassPERG, Conservation Law Foundation, and Clean Water Action. And definitely want to kick off my brief comments here by just saying thank you for, hearing us and working to really gather more input on this really critical 10-year plan. And I think I want to, sort of pick up on some of the themes that Janet was laying out, that, the root causes of climate change, the root causes of environmental injustice are really the same. And that, as a modern society, we have, kind of come to this, we've been acting as if some communities are disposable. Black, Indigenous, people of color, poor communities, these are the communities that are disposable. We dispose on them with our trash and our waste and our landfills and our dumps and our trash incinerators. And that is, completely immoral, obviously, and that climate change is from that same mindset, that, the climate is disposable, the land is disposable, and we are bumping up against that reality in really intense ways, where we are seeing, people, who are getting hit first and worst by COVID. There's those same communities who are just, literally dying faster because we treat them as if they're disposable. And that the International Panel on Climate Change, is saying that we are bumping up against the reality that if we don't get our act together, that climate change is going to be basically, we're on track to be extinct. And so I just wanted to kind of loop those things together, because they're obvious, it's good to hold them and apart and to connect them. And I want to say that, to me, when this question, the answer that yells out at me is we have to go faster. We need to clean up our waste system. We need to get to zero waste faster. We have got to get to zero emissions on climate change faster. Every time the scientists update their predictions on, how bad climate change is going to hit us, the predictions don't get better, they get worse, right? They did the two degrees heat up scenario, and then they were like, well, let's look and see what 1.5 is, and they're like, oh, it's actually almost as bad. When the scientists look at the ice melting, it's always melting faster than they expected. The predictions get worse and worse. And so when I look at, with the comments from other folks about how there's so much of our waste stream that is recyclable, that is compostable, we could do a lot really fast, and there's no downside to front loading, there's only an upside. If we get to 2030 and we're we did all this great work and it was actually faster than we needed it to be, what's the downside to that? We'll only have made it better for environmental justice communities, better for climate change, when the entire, people's lives on the planet are in the balance. So that is my little soapbox moment about please front load the master plan. Please go fast, because we are, people, it is life or death, both in the short term for environmental justice communities and for the planet. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Claire. So I think what I'm going to do is make a little change on the fly here. So I think both Claire and Janet kind of referenced how a lot of these issues are interconnected, whether we're talking about environmental justice, climate change, or COVID relative to all our waste management and recycling issues. And I think that's an important point. So I think what I'm going to do is just Greg, if we can just jump ahead to the COVID slide, I just want to get those questions up too. And just, I think, open this up a little bit more. So encourage, people to, weigh in from this perspective now as well, if this is on your mind. So the questions that we put out here are: what impacts does COVID-19 have on waste management? What impacts has it had? What impacts do we think it will have going forward? And then are there specific initiatives that may be problematic or beneficial to implement as we adjust to the impacts of COVID-19 from a waste management and recycling perspective? So this is not to close out input on either environmental justice issues or on climate change issues, but I think in the spirit of some of these comments about how these things are interconnected, I just wanted to get these questions up here as well, and just encourage people to weigh in from any of these perspectives, or if you want to speak more to those interconnections from your perspective, that would be great as well. So just like to kind of open it up across all three sets of issues that we've talked about, both environmental justice and climate change, and then COVID-19 impacts as well.
John, this is Greg. I just wanted to read one other comment, and that came in. The town of Wellfleet adopted a recycling policy in 1988. Its purchase of recycled goods policy was last updated in 2009. Could MassDEP create a zero waste policy for municipalities? MassDEP's recycling dividends program would be a good place to start. I do want to remind everyone we're happy to hear your voice too. I don't mind reading the comments, but feel free to raise your hand and let's chat.
Great. And Steve would like to write another comment here. We're lower your hand, Steve, and take you off mute. 1 second.
Okay, on the COVID issue, thank you. Much more activity on this as of late. We want to let all on the call know, and the department knows, but there's some other issues for the department I'll get to. But during the pandemic crisis, both the federal government and the state of Massachusetts deemed the recycling and waste industry to be essential services. So we were given a mandate to stay open during the pandemic. So we are like the healthcare workers, like the police and firemen and firefighters. We are like the store clerks and others charged with working day in and day out with the virus. There were very uncertain times. The industry, fortunately, was able to do a good job, excellent job, without being harmed by the virus to any great extent. And we do want to give a big shout out to the DEP and Greg and his staff and Commissioner Suberg and others, because of the connection between the department and the industry. We had several calls and shared information and had constant updates. We were very concerned about something happening in the system, a major shock, and having those conference calls and having those discussions and open communications was very helpful to keep this essential industry running. Again, I sort of say that we've been able to do the work with the great leadership and dedication of the hardworking team of the men and women of our companies across the Commonwealth. I think a good way to look at the industry in the state has been that we've been adaptive and resilient. Companies learn to run their operations without going to the office, muster meetings for the drivers getting out in the morning before their routes changed, and the route sheets and stuff were in their cabs when they got to the site to go collect. We reduced our business operations corresponding to the downtick in business activity. We staffed up when the municipalities' residential work picked up, and we implemented a whole bunch of safety protocols to protect the workers doing the jobs. And then we also had to look at what was going on inside the facilities whether they be waste to energy plants or at the landfills or at the recycling centers, because we had issues of safe spacing, work and lunchroom areas, safe distancing, washing of the hands, and the mask use, and all this other kind of stuff that went with the pandemic, which is sort of now old and in the hat. But when we were doing this in those last weeks of March and early weeks of April, it was very difficult and trying and long hours and just exceptional response on the part of the industry. We had a couple of spots where some of the workers tested positive, and we had a couple of issues here and there. But I think overall we were able to get through this. The people who work in our jobs wanted to come to work. Some of the companies, one of the things that's important to remember, waste and recycling volumes are relative to what type of activity is going on in our world. So with the shutdown of the business community, there was a fall off in a lot of the trucks that were going out to collect the recyclables and waste made by businesses. So some people did get furloughed. I think if you look through the PPE list from the federal government, a lot of the companies had to take advantage of the money that was given by the federal government because they operate as small businesses. We are like any other industry getting through this pandemic, that we have a high fixed costs. We have labor issues to take care of our people. We have brick and mortar mortgage payments to make. We have contracts to fulfill. And through that whole cycle, we were able to do it, and the recyclables and waste got collected and processed properly, and the industry performed well there. And we just want to, the other thing too is we went, right along with the safety protocols. There's a couple of things, as we did some things inside the recycling plants and on our operations, we are now buying PPE. We are now creating additional spacing. Some companies are looking at redesigning facilities and operations, and there's impacts on that. Much akin to the way we had the recycling situation where we had to improve the quality of the bales we made. We slowed down the line and put additional sorters on the line. Those are added costs to getting the material up to a market grade commodity level. It's the same kinds of things happened during the COVID crisis and are happening today. A lot of business will be lost. Restaurants, downtown market business areas won't reopen. So, we're a sort of a counter-cyclical industry. We're going to have to deal with that down the road. But for all the short-term impacts of the crisis, the industry did a great job, we think, and we give them a lot of applause, and we really appreciate the support and coordination with the DEP and the state and the communities, making sure that we were able to do this. So it's had a big toll, but we've survived and done the job. So that's some thoughts about COVID from the industry.
Right. Thank you, Steve.
John, the next person who would like to participate is Lydia Vanetti. And we're going to take you off mute in 1 second, Lydia. Just please be patient. Okay, I think you're all set.
Hi, thank you. It's Lydia Vivante from Wellfleet. And the COVID-19 impacts here, we have had pay-as-you-throw for a number of years, and it was suspended until further notice because of COVID. Single stream recycling was implemented. Hopefully this is temporary because I'm concerned about the contamination and the processing, how it has to be processed on the other end, separated by employees of those big process, the MRFs, the MRFs. Also, the glass is not being captured. We used to have a program where our glass was being collected for processed glass aggregate, and now that's stopped. It's because of single stream, it's just going into the hopper and getting transported off Cape. But before, it would have been taken just to the town of Dennis, say 45 minutes away, and turned into gravel that Public Works could use in construction and roadbed projects. Food waste is collected again. They suspended that for a little while. We have a drop-off transfer station with 2-wheeled carts. It goes to Dennis again and is transported from there off Cape. It'd be great to have some local farms be able to process it on Cape rather than going across the bridges. As you know, the bridges are probably going to be replaced in the next 10 years. So anything we can do to use rail or not have it to go across those bridges would be helpful for the Cape. So yeah, that in terms of COVID, another thing is we have I think it's a $200,000 spent on porta potties this summer. Just as a comparison, it was $45,000 last summer. So it's a big budget item that I guess the federal government is helping with, but it's quite a difference. All of the restrooms are closed and they're all using the portable hand washing stations also, which I have to say are kind of an eyesore. You know, when you see like 7 of these things lined up in the town center or at the ponds and things, it just brings home how difficult this whole situation is. Thanks. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. One of the things that we did recently is we brought together, we held a webinar for municipal officials to both hear from them and share information among municipalities about how different communities were trying to adapt to COVID impacts along some of the lines of the issues that we raised. That information is available on our website. We'd be happy to, you know, try to connect and share that further with any municipal officials. I think there were some great strategies identified that the communities have implemented to try to keep moving forward and adjust to COVID impacts. So I thought that was a really interesting discussion to be part of.
John, we have another participant here, Jillian Howell. Take it off mute, Jillian. Okay, you're all set.
Thanks. So echo what everybody said about having this forum and for all of us to provide input. I am with Saugus River Watershed and also the Alliance for Health. I grew up about a quarter mile from the Wheeler-Brader Saugus facility. So that's sort of where my interest in all of this stems from. I wanted to talk a little bit about 2 things, hit on climate change and environmental justice. And first on climate change, 2 notes on this. So in the draft solid waste plan, there's the allowance of permitting of up to 350,000 tons of additional annual management capacity in either innovative waste to energy or other integrated waste management technologies. If we're highlighting, and you all are highlighting climate change as an issue, waste to energy should not be promoted or expanded. This will only contribute further to climate change. The second note on climate change is the actual facilities where the trash is ending up. Specifically for Wheeler-Brader Saugus, it's located in a floodplain, in a coastal marsh, on a road that has been elevated because of the rising waters around it. To highlight this facility and rely on it for the next 10 years or further into the future, when we know that not only is it contributing to climate change through the burning of trash, but also it is at risk. That landfill is at risk right now because of storm surge and because of rising sea levels. And on environmental justice, I really appreciate this being highlighted by you all and the fact that you reopened this process to allow for engagement of more folks because this has always been an important thing and as has been said multiple times tonight, in the world that we're living in right now, not only with everything surrounding racial issues, but also COVID-19, which only exacerbates these things. I'm really glad to see that this has been highlighted as an issue. When we're thinking about environmental justice, I like to think about it as having two components. In order for there to truly be environmental justice, there needs to be both involvement and outcome. The involvement is this piece today. I really hope that you incorporate what's being said by people that are actually being impacted on the ground and what they want. And the second is what the actual outcome is. So this plan outlines strategies, and a lot of it is incremental, which is necessary for sure. But I want to echo what Claire said, that this is actually an emergency. These minor changes and small goals are all well and good, but that doesn't change the fact that these places with landfills and with incinerators, even if the amount of trash going to them is less and the burning is less, that doesn't change the actual impact to them all that much. They are still suffering disproportionately from air pollution, and they're still feeling that. So this is, again, this is like an actual emergency. And just a note on how these facilities are state of the art and they're permitted and to follow the rules that the rules and regulations that are in place. And again, I'm specifically speaking to my experience with Wheeler Greater Saugus. Any state-of-the-art facility wouldn't need to request from MassDEP different nitrogen oxide levels because they can't meet the ones that are on the books now because of their outdated technology. To me, that is not state-of-the-art. It's also not state-of-the-art that routinely, for months now, maybe longer, residents are having to endure noise pollution, and not just minor noise pollution, but like noise pollution that wakes you up in the middle of the night. That is not a state-of-the-art facility. Another piece brought up earlier was, permitting of these facilities and site assignments that takes into account public involvement. I would argue that it doesn't if a site assignment was assigned back in the 50s and 60s when we thought significantly differently about waste management generally. And the amount of input on since then has been very limited. And even when input is allowed, 2 or 3 years back now, I can't remember exactly, but the Wheeler Greater facility in Saugus, despite a lot of public opposition from surrounding communities, that permit was extended. So while there are all of these, opportunities for public input and there are permits and regulations, I think it's really important to highlight what actually is happening on the ground. If you ask anybody who is living around a facility, if this public participation matters or if these permits matter, it doesn't matter if the actual impact to them is not being felt. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. I see Janet has her hand up again. We'll take you off mute, Janet. Sorry, there seems to be a delay. I think you're all set now, Janet.
Yeah. Okay, thanks a lot. Yeah, I just wanted to briefly second, I know Jillian didn't make a formal motion, but I'm not into like symbolism, but I do think in this case, creating and crafting policy, that words do matter. And waste to energy, maybe Deborah was the one who used the term branding earlier. Waste to energy is a made up name. They're incinerators. They burn materials that could otherwise be reused or reduced. It creates pollution, and it is a filthy, expensive, and illogical way to create energy. So I think we do need to flag these, industry branded terms as we create policy, because waste to energy is just not acceptable in our book. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet.
And I don't see any other hands raised at the moment, John.
Okay, thanks, Kurt. So we now, I know we asked you guys these specific questions, and we put these specific questions up on the slides, and we're very much focused on these questions and these issues and seeking input on those. So we did want to emphasize those, but more than that, this meeting is really about giving you all a chance to have a voice into this process and have input into this process. So I want to make sure now we still have a decent chunk of time here. So I want to make sure if you have thoughts, if you have ideas and input that you want to share with us tonight, I want to encourage you to do that now, even if, whether you think it fits into any of these particular questions or not. We do want to take this opportunity to hear from you and hear what's important to you, what your concerns are, and what your ideas are. So, I want to, with that thought, I want to kind of really open it up a little bit more and encourage your comments, whatever comments you might have, even if they don't seem to address directly one of these questions that we've got up here. Okay, so I don't think we have anything else right now, Kurt.
No hands are raised. Correct, John.
Okay, so I still want to keep this open. So don't feel if you want to raise your hand or chat to us, please continue to do that. But I want to take a moment now to talk a little bit about next steps and where we're going from here, and still at the same time keep the meeting open for comment and input from you. So if you have a thought, raise your hand again or let us know in chat. But we will have a number of other opportunities going forward to hear from you and to hear from others. So we do have 3 more of these Zoom meetings set up over the next couple months, and those are on August 20th, September 1st, and September 10th are all evening meetings at the same time window. We do have below here our the link to our webpage on our solid waste master plan. Although it's also honestly just easier to whoops. Can we Greg's going to put that back up. So you're welcome to use that link, but also if you just go to our MassDEP webpage, mass.gov/DEP, and just search for Solid Waste Master Plan, that'll bring you right there. And that webpage has a couple of things. So one is the actual Solid Waste Master Plan document. We also have the presentation that I mentioned. It's about a 30-minute go-to-meeting webinar that you can listen to and get an overview of the plan. Then if you want to submit comments in other ways, we're also happy to take your comments and input either by email, and this is our email address that we've set up to receive comments, or you can also send that to me by mail, and we'll get it that way as well. So if you prefer to comment that way, either by email or mail, that works. You're welcome to participate in one of our other calls as we go forward as well. It looks like Claire has her hand up.
We'll unmute Claire. Sorry, there's a delay with Zoom for some reason.
I kept unmuting and then the other. Anyway, I just wanted to close by saying that I'm really hopeful that we can move towards a plan for zero waste. I got to participate in this process 10 years ago, and some of the themes are the same, and I feel like there's so much momentum, there's so much common sense. I think about how much it just, like, we're going to have to build that political will, we're going to have to enforce. I actually think about the solid waste master plan every time well, before pandemic, when I was in a Dunkin' Donuts, because I'm a Massachusetts person and I like Dunkin' Donuts, and there are no recycling bins. And I think about the solid waste master plan with my coffee and how it needs to be enforced. And I just feel that there's so much changing right now. We're in a crisis, and that brings so much opportunity. And I look forward to, continuing to figure this out so that we can, get all the recyclables recycled, all the organics composted, phase out the incinerators, and, heal the environmental justice communities, because it's just, it's pretty much a no-brainer. And I just really appreciate y'all working on this, and thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Claire, appreciate it.
I see Steve has his hand up there. John, we'll take him off mute.
I'm unmuted, it says. Good. Just a real quick question. Now with the timeline delayed, I imagine you're pretty far along with your response document to the closed December comments, and now we're going to have hearings. I don't see the date. When is the comments date due? It's not. I can't see it because you're in the pictures in the middle of it. When is this?
Yeah, I'm sorry. We should have that on there. So the comment period will run through September 15th,
okay.
2020.
So do you have a timeline then from there about when you think you might? We're talking about early next year, about when the document would be released.
So we have to see. I think we have to see both the breadth and depth of comment that we receive over the course of this process. And I think it's a little premature to say for sure when we're going to go through the process of revising the plan and digesting all the comments and preparing the response to comments document. This is intended to guide us over this 10-year planning period. So ideally, all things being equal, we'd like to finish it by the end of 2020. But I think, as we've made clear by reopening this for comment right now, we do not want to rush that and tie that to a specific date on the calendar. We want to make sure that we're able to give the comments thorough review and a thorough response. So I think, we can't say for certain about exactly when we would expect to have a final plan.
Yeah, and is there any connection between the document release and some of the other activities with been talked about at the SWAC meeting about the some possible potential regulatory changes? And are they in sync? Do you want to have the plan in place as you advance the change in regulation, or are there a couple of things that you might be able to do to help move the needle before the release of the plan in terms of the regulatory process?
Sure, I think there are definitely aspects of the plan and initiatives within the plan that we can move forward before the plan is finalized. So we're not, we don't necessarily have to have everything finalized within the plan before we can move forward with it. So we are running a lot of programs on a daily basis and continuing to do that work. So where we can and where we think it's appropriate, we will be continuing to try to move initiatives forward at the same time as we're working to revise and finalize the final solid waste master plan.
And just one last question, and it's just as a generic, the world that we live in, the COVID has changed. The state budget has taken a significant hit in terms of revenues. The municipalities are probably hurt even more. We have no idea about what's going to happen to the base of the business community, the tax-paying businesses that support all the operations of state government. And, some folks have sort of said in some circles, in some places, that everything that COVID has done has sort of put everything sort of on hold until we can right the ship and make sure we get our financial house in order and identify, you know, what monies are available, and to whatever extent the powers that be reprioritize what we do in that world. Has the department given any thought to how the upset from COVID is going to affect the plan and its communities and the businesses of the state?
Well, the part of that is what we're seeking comment on from people around the state, but I think I'd maybe turn to either Greg or Stephanie. I'm not going to comment on sort of overall state budget picture issues, but if you guys want to add anything to respond to that question. I think, you know, just for COVID in general, we know there have been a lot of impacts to all sorts of things, and we do want to think about how those may affect the plan and how maybe we should modify the plan due to those. So that is something we want to comment on. But other than that, I think I'm not sure I can add a lot more about that right now.
Again, it's just what we're living with, John. Thank you very much.
I just add a quick note about the state budget. You know, we all know that the revenues are down and all that, and the inputs that support the state budget, a lot have been sort of suspended due to COVID, but we don't know what that will mean specifically for, you know, agency budgets. And right now we kind of have a sort of continuing budget in the short term, and then we'll have to see what the legislature does. And then, you know, we're waiting to see what kind of additional federal relief there might be for states. We're all reading and hearing a lot about that in the news. So that's an important piece. So there really just are a lot of unknowns right now. So we know we're going to have to make adjustments, but we don't know exactly at what scale or when. So we're just sort of taking in information and trying to, you know, be creative.
And Steve, I think that goes very, you know, in the area of solid waste in a general sense anyway. You know, it's this kind of macroeconomics piece. I mean, you know, we don't know how construction will be impacted. We know we've seen some shifts out of the gate, you know, commercial waste, you know, disappearing and residential waste jumping up. But will that be, you know, how will that change over the next, you know, 8, 12, 18, 5 years? There's a lot of the, you know, potential changes that could, you know, definitely disrupt or maybe beneficially or maybe negatively, just, you know, the management of waste and how we try to strive to reduce it. That's one of the reasons why I think it's really critical for our, even more critical now, that our plan has this ongoing participatory component to it with the action plans that we are continuing to work on, whether it's organics, construction, demolition, debris, the new reduce, reuse work group. Those are all going to be very important. They were important before, but even now, this is just another example with COVID, how, you know, hey, at any moment in time, things change, and our plan should be able to, and not the plan itself may not change, but our approach towards managing waste and reducing waste should be able to adapt.
So I want to offer up, you know, one more opportunity if there's anyone who hasn't had a chance to share a comment who wants to, or you know, or someone who has who wants to add anything more. Just open up one more opportunity before we wrap things up tonight. If there's anything else you want to share with us, we would welcome that right now. And so I want to thank everyone for taking time out of your evening to speak with us and to join us for this meeting. And I'll just turn it back to Stephanie now.
Well, I'll just add my thanks and gratitude on behalf of the agency, our commissioner, Marty Suberg, and the Baker-Polito administration. This has been a great conversation. Like I said at the beginning, you know, having a virtual public meeting is something we haven't done a lot of. So it's really gratifying to see that we can do it well and really have a good dialogue. So I'm looking forward to the rest of the discussions and remember that you have, a lot of time if you choose to give us written comments. You have till September 15th, and the email box is there too if you have other questions or thoughts that you come up with in the meantime. And really just thank you for your time this evening, and just say be safe and be well, everyone.
I would just say I was the only one who created an error during the meeting with the slides. Sorry. But thanks for participating, folks.
Take care, everyone. Have a good night.